So today we want to look at forensic auditing. And this concept of forensic audit relies on your knowledge on what you call the frauds and errors. For example, you say the main difference between a fraud and an error is what? One is a fraud is deliberate or intentional. Yes, the other one is an intentional misstatement. So forensic audit or this concept of forensic accounting, we're going to discuss on what it entails and looking at the frauds that may happen and an auditor acting as an expert witness. So before this, then we can start by defining what forensic accounting is. And this concept of forensic accounting actually was asked in a previous past paper, which you can look at, which was in December 2017, question 4, question 1A, December 2017, question 1A. December 2017, question 1A, whereby you are required to discuss this concept of forensic accounting. So we define forensic accounting as that practice of reviewing any form of financial matters and acting as an expert witness if the fraud gets to trial. So you are asked question number 1A, December 2017, question number 1A. You are asked on the difference between forensic accounting and forensic audit. So forensic accounting, you can say, so this one refers to the whole process of investigating. So forensic accounting refers to the whole process. So this is what you would have written in that answer, of investigating a financial matter, and this auditor may end up acting as an expert witness, including potentially acting as an expert witness, if this fraud comes to trial, if the fraud comes to trial. So we have instances where the auditor's work will be required in terms of proving these fraudulent activities and him acting as an expert witness. So let me explain what an expert witness means. So an expert witness means in that field in which you are in. For example, the auditor is in the accounting and auditing field. So the knowledge that you have helps you to acquire some evidence of which can be used in this trial. So he acts as an expert witness, having done the financial investigation that you're calling the forensic accounting or forensic auditing. So what then do we define as forensic auditing in this case? So forensic auditing, on the other hand, so when you're explaining this question also, so you're told to differentiate between a forensic accounting and forensic auditing. So a forensic audit is whereby you use audit procedures to gather evidence. So for forensic auditing, so this is the process of using audit evidence, audit procedures, and techniques in order to gather what you're saying, in order to gather evidence as part of the forensic investigation, So in other words, you use auditing procedures to gather information as part of this forensic investigation. So it is also worth to mention what forensic investigation means. So forensic investigation also, that this term that you're using as forensic investigation is the process of gathering. So this one is the process of gathering evidence, is the process of gathering evidence, gathering evidence, gathering evidence, which can be used, which ultimately will be used, in legal proceedings, to either solve or settle disputes, to settle disputes. So for example, disputes such as, for example, the concept of money laundering, as such. So a forensic investigation is whereby you gather information or evidence which will ultimately be used in a legal proceeding. So that is the main difference between a forensic audit and forensic accounting. So this one, you can add here that it uses the accounting knowledge also, in terms of carrying out that investigation. So for this one, you can say also it uses accounting and investigative skills, So this is just how you would have answered this question. So when you're introducing this concept of forensic audit or forensic auditing, you usually have what you call the forensic accounting and the forensic investigation. So this data that you have gathered here, when you use these audit procedures in carrying out the forensic investigation, that is what we call the forensic audit. So what are some of the areas in which this forensic auditing may be applied? So on the basis of the applications of this forensic audit, we usually have, one of them is what we have mentioned here. In the case of what? Fraud investigation, when you're investigating into fraud investigations also. So one will be in fraud investigations, and under these fraud investigations, the main thing that we are investigating in this case is to what extent has the fraud been done and who. So the first one is in case of fraud investigations. Remember, this is where the auditor would, in the end, may act as an expert witness, So one, they said, so one of the things that we carry out a fraud investigation to do is to identify the perpetrators, of a fraud, Secondly, also to know if a deliberate fraud actually occurred, or a fraud that has taken a deliberate action towards fraud, fraudulent activities has actually taken place. Also, another thing that you may investigate into is the extent for which this fraud also has happened. So also to determine the nature and extent, of fraud, to what extent has this fraud been perpetrated in the organization. Another area that forensic auditing may happen would be in case of verifying insurance claims, insurance claims also in insurance claims. For example, what you're saying, one of the principles under insurance claims is what we call the principle of proximate cause. Proximate cause. So if you're to ever pay individuals, the cause of loss should be the one that was insured against. So you may conduct an investigation into the cause of such a claim that is being made by the insured. That is what you're saying. And then also on the negligence claims also, negligence claims. So in this case, where the auditor is, accused of negligence, a forensic accountant may be appointed. A forensic accountant may be appointed. May be appointed to review his work. May be appointed to review his work. Review the work. To review his work. The work. So this is to show that this person did not act in a negligent manner. And then also to resolve disputes, like we said, to resolve disputes. Also, this area had been examined in a prior year, which we can look at how that was asked. And May 2018, can look at May 2018, question 1B, May 2018, question 1B, on the application of this application of forensic auditing, or the role of forensic accountant in carrying out this auditing. So May 2018, question 1B. May 2018, question 1B. So this is on the basis of the role of the forensic accountant. And you're asked, with reference to the above statement, describe the role of a forensic accountant in one, this criminal investigation. So this one you would have stated. So for example, in this case, what the role of forensic accountant is in this application of forensic auditing. So the role of the forensic accountant, we look at this also, who the forensic accountant is. In this case, the role of the forensic accountant, one, under the criminal investigations. So this is the areas of application where forensic auditing may happen. So what you will have stated in this case is that the forensic accountant would generally want to know the extent for which this fraud had taken place. So one will be, so the role in this case will be to determine the nature, and extent of fraud, extent of the fraud that has taken place, nature and extent of fraud, and also to identify the perpetrators of the fraud, because the whole aim of conducting this investigation is to know this kind of fraudulent activities. And then also the second one would have been in the case of litigation support. So litigation support. So in this case, the role of the forensic accountant would be, he would act as what? An expert witness. That is what you're saying. So one will act as an expert witness in the case or in a legal proceeding, over negligence of an auditor, We have said that he conducts an investigation into the work of the auditor under this negligence claims. So he will act as an expert witness also as a litigation support. And then also on the basis of what? The insurance claims, So this negligence claim so he will act as an expert witness in a legal proceedings of a negligence of an auditor by reviewing, also by giving findings or by giving the findings of the investigation And then secondly, the last one will be on the basis of the insurance claim. So this one, you will measure the extent of the quantifiable damage. So in this case, the forensic accountant, will should quantify the economic damage, or should quantify the damage due to the loss suffered, or should try and verify the kind of loss suffered due to this insurance risk happening. So that is on the basis of insurance claims. So these are some of the aspects that you are required to answer. So necessarily this was on the basis of the application. For example, in the criminal investigation, as the litigation support also under the insurance claims, So this forensic auditing is very important for auditors. But then what is the essence of carrying out the forensic audit, or what are we trying to do when we conduct the forensic auditing of firms? So this is on the basis of the objectives of a forensic audit, objectives of a forensic investigation, So the objectives of this forensic investigation was actually even asked in a previous year, which you can look at also in November 2018, question 5B, also November 2018, question 5B. November 2018, question 5B. So in this case, question 5B. So if you are ever asked such a question in an exam sitting, one thing that you will need to know is on what do we define as this forensic auditing or forensic investigation. We've said that it is the process of acquiring or gathering evidence which ultimately may be used in legal proceedings. So one of the objectives of this is to identify the fraudulent activities and also assist in this legal proceedings. So one, you can say it can be used to assess financial data with the intent. So can be used assess financial data with the aim of identifying fraudulent activities, because we're saying that you conduct this forensic audit whereby you apply these audit procedures and gather information that will be used in legal proceedings to identify these fraudulent activities. Another objective or another essence of this is that also the findings of a forensic investigation can assist in legal proceedings, in this case, that can assist in legal proceedings also. And the forensic accountant can act can act as an expert witness. And then the objective of this forensic investigation may necessarily mean that we're trying to identify these frauds and errors so that we can come up with a culture whereby we do not entertain this kind of frauds. So this forensic investigation also, it can be used also the objectives. So the forensic investigation can be used also as a way of educating or as a way of educating firms on measures to be undertaken, to prevent fraudulent activities, to prevent this fraud from happening. So these are some of the reasons why we conduct forensic investigation, or the objectives as to why we do so. So these guide the forensic audit that you are saying. For example, you will be able to identify these fraudulent activities and act as an expert witness in case it comes to fraud. So remember, these forensic accountants have a role to play when conducting this ethical or conducting this investigation. But then they are governed by the professions or the code of ethics that govern this profession. So the code of ethics that we know of are the legal professional frameworks that we had discussed. For example, what are some of those codes of ethics that an accountant has to live by? One is, or an auditor. One is integrity. The other one is, yes, professional behavior also. Objectivity. Another one is which one? Professional competence and what? Due care and due care. So we can look at a question whereby this was asked also. November 2016, question 3A also. So this is on the basis of a code of ethics applied also in forensic investigation. So this is November 2016. You can look at November 2016, question 3A. Question 3A. So these are some of the codes of ethics that you will have required to answer in this case. So November 2016, question 3A. So you're told your audit client, Informat Solutions Limited, has requested your audit firm to undertake a forensic investigation relating to a suspected payroll fraud at the company. Analyze how the code of ethics for professional accountants would be applied in undertaking the forensic investigation of the suspected fraud in Informat Solutions. So what are those codes of ethics that you would abide by when you're conducting this forensic investigation? So one is what you're saying on the basis of integrity. So the codes of ethics in this case. So one is on the basis of integrity. And we said that for integrity, the forensic accountant should be honest and straightforward in his dealings when conducting the forensic investigation. So in this case, you can say a forensic accountant should be honest and transparent when conducting or when dealing with people, or when dealing with the client while conducting the forensic investigation, Remember, we have said the forensic investigation, this is whereby you acquire the necessary evidence that will be used in legal proceedings. So you have to be a person who is of high integrity so that you do not compromise this process of forensic investigation. The other one is on the basis of objectivity. So the forensic accountant should not be biased in any way. A forensic investigator. So in this case, you're saying, so the forensic investigator must be perceived, forensic investigator. In this case, must be perceived to be independent, when conducting the forensic investigation. And just to reiterate what independence is, this is whereby the auditor is to arrive at a decision where he has not been influenced or is unbiased, that is on the basis of independence. And we talked about this concept of independence, and we said necessarily we have two types of independence. One is independence of mind, and the other one is independence of yes, the independence of appearance. And what are some of the threats to independence? One is self-interest, self-review, also familiarity and advocacy threats, and also the intimidation threats. So he should ensure that in his conducting this forensic investigation, he does not compromise on the independence bit. And then also confidentiality. So also the a forensic accountant or an investigator should not divulge the information of the client, unless certain conditions are met. For example, what are some of the instances where confidentiality is not to be upheld? One is in the case of litigation, because this evidence will be used in legal proceedings. Another one is in the case of what? Where the client gives what? Permission for this person to divulge this information. Also in the case that you're asked by relevant authority, for example, KRA, you can divulge such information. So should not divulge the information of the client unless in the case of legal proceedings. Case in point what you're discussing in the case of legal proceedings, such as this forensic in the legal proceedings relating to the fraud. So, and then also on the basis of the other kind of codes of ethics on professional competence and care. And due care. So he is required to show care and skill when conducting this forensic investigation. So this one you're saying forensic accountant is required. Forensic accountant is required to show care and skill in conducting the investigation. Such that the client knows that he or she has received professional services also. Then the professional behavior professional behavior, that he should not behave in a way that degrades the profession in itself that we call forensic accountancy. So this forensic accountant or the forensic investigator should not behave in a manner that lowers the standards of the profession, or what is regarded to be the profession standards of the profession, of the profession. So that is on that note what you're saying. So these are some of the aspects that you are required to state in that codes of ethics. So we have a difference between these fraud audits, or what we call the forensic audits or fraud audits, and the financial audits. So one of the differences is that one of them is actually a legal requirement by law, while the other one, it is a voluntary form of audit, whereby if you suspect a fraud, then you can have the fraud audits being done. So on the basis of the differences between these two, we can look at also November 2020. So what are some of the differences between the fraud audits and the financial audits, fraud audits and the financial audit. So in this case, you can look at November 2020. This is November 2020, question number, was it question number 1? I think it was question number 1. Yes, question number 1A. So November 2020, question number 1A. So you are required to state, so you're told some institutions have questions why financial auditors do not detect more frauds. The truth, however, is that the process of financial audits are different from those of fraud audits. So explain 4 focus areas of fraud audits that distinguish them from financial audits. So this is on the basis of the differences between the fraud audits and the financial audits. So let me take you back to the concept of auditing in itself. So we define auditing to be what? Auditing is known as the independent examination of books of accounts and vouchers of a company to establish whether they portray a true and to express an opinion on whether they portray a true and fair view. So the same case applies when you're conducting this financial audit. But now for the fraud audit, the objective is to identify what? A fraud. That is one of the bases of the differences between these two. So if you are to show these differences in form of a columnar format or table, so you'll have on one side the fraud audits, and the other one you'll have the financial audits, just to distinguish the key features on the same. So one, we have said they differ on the basis of the objective, because one is to express an opinion on whether the financial statements portray a true and fair view, while the other one is to identify frauds. So in this case, you're saying, so this one, the objective is the auditor to express an opinion on the truth and fairness of the financial statements, or the truth and fairness of the financial statements. And then this other one, the objective is to check on the correctness. Objective is to check on the correctness of accounts and whether the frauds have taken place. So to determine is to check or to determine the correctness of accounts and whether frauds have taken place. So and then let me ask you on this basis. So we have different types of audits. Necessarily, we have which types of audits? One is we have the internal, also the external. So the classification of these types of audit may be on the basis of scope. So let me take you back a bit to the types and classifications of audit. So it may be on the basis of scope or on the basis of time. So on the basis of scope is the extent or the nature of which this, the context. So one is on the basis of, so this is the context, is more or less as this context. So one is on external and the other one is on internal audit. And then on the basis of time, it can either be continuous or it can be what we call as interim audits or the final audits. So these financial audits necessarily, they have transactions based on these timings. For example, for a financial audit, it will necessarily include transactions for that year only. But let's say you want to investigate a fraud, it might mean that you have to look at transactions going past that financial year. So that is also another difference that we are saying, that on the basis of the time period covered by these audits. So the period covered is normally for this one, you're saying the period covered is normally for that financial year. Period covered is normally for that financial year in which the financial audit is being conducted. Is normally for all transactions in that particular year. For all transactions in that particular year. And then while for this one, the period covered extends or is more than for that financial year. So there is no limitation in terms of periods. That is what you're saying. So there is no limitation for this one. Because you're investigating a fraud, there is no limitation in terms of period covered or of period covered. The reason why there is no limitation is, for example, an example of a fraud that we have, necessarily a common fraud that we have is what we call the concept of teaming and lading. So this concept is whereby you try to write off a debtor's debt by covering it up with future receipts of these debtors. So let's say you have 3 debtors. So one of these debtors, once he makes payments of, let's say, an amount of 5 million, so you use this other debtor's receipts in terms of the payments, you try and write off such a debt from the company. So when you're conducting this kind of frauds of teaming and lading, it may mean that you have layers and layers of transactions such that it is impossible to track the transactions that you had written off as bad debts. And such a thing may take a long time. That's why there is no limitation in terms of period if you were to conduct such an investigation. That is what you're saying. And then a financial audit, I told you, it may be, so this one, it's a requirement of law. It may be a requirement of law, specifically for a public company. So once a public company has been incorporated, it has to have this kind of a statutory audit, or what we are calling as the financial audits. And then also, on this one is, you only conduct this fraud audit if there is suspicion of frauds. There is no aspect of conducting this fraud audits if there is no suspicion. So that is what you're saying. So this is done where there is suspicion of fraud. Also for this one, this is done. This is done where there is suspicion of fraud. suspicion of fraud. That is the only time this one is actually mostly required is in form of suspicion of fraud. So that is on the basis of these differences in these types of frauds. And then for the techniques used in fraud audits, so the techniques that may be used in this case, techniques used may be what we call the analytical review procedures. So basic computation of the ratios and the trend analysis. So the techniques used is to analyze the ratio analysis. What we're saying is to analyze the ratio analysis. Also conduct what we call vouching, also among other kind of tests, tests. And then vouching of a specific area, that you have suspicion that has frauds. And then another, the difference with this now, you conduct this kind of tests on all aspects of the financial statements. So the techniques used in this case are, so for this one you can say the techniques used are the substantive tests, and we talked about these substantive tests when you're conducting, where you cannot rely on the ICS, you have to carry out further tests known as these substantive tests to know how transactions arise from their origin. Also, the risk assessment is another technique that is also used, the risk assessment also on all areas of the financial statements, So these are some of the aspects that you also need to know on these financial audits and the fraud audits. So the fraud audits, that is on the basis of the forensic audits that you are conducting also. So going back to our question, in November 2015, question 5B, November 2015, question 5B. So I want to show you how this forensic investigation can be done in terms of the procedures to be adopted. November 2015. So question 5B. So you're being asked, so you're told you're a manager in an audit firm and double up as a head of the forensic investigation department. Your audit firm has recently been appointed and the auditors of African as the African Manufacturers Limited for the year ending 31st December 2015. The directors of African Manufacturers Limited have contacted your audit firm regarding a suspected fraud relating to the company's payroll, and you have been assigned to undertake a forensic investigation and have held preliminary discussions with the finance director of the company. The finance director suspects that the accountant who had been absent from work after the finance director queried the increasing costs of overtime and casual worker payments could be involved in some fraudulent activities. So, and then you are asked, required part B, explain the procedure you would follow to gather evidence on the suspected payroll fraud. So one of the things that such a question requires you to know is, what are some of the aspects that we talked about under the controls of a payment, or what are some of the audit procedures that we had under the control of a payment, of a payroll. So one of the things that you would look at is, remember the case in question is that there were some instances of overtime payments. So one, you will have to obtain a list of all the employees of this company. So that is November 2015. Remember, you're investigating into this fraud. So any aspect that can give you further information as to this kind of fraudulent activity would guide you on the same. So so the procedures to follow to gather the audit evidence, in this case, or the evidence would be, so one, obtain a list of all the employees of the company, of all the employees of this company, of all the employees of the company, of all the employees of the company, which should be accompanied by information about their salaries, which should be accompanied by the salaries range of the employees, so that you know if there was any form of overpayment of these employees also. Secondly, also you will try and check the accuracy of the payments made. So I told you, when you're conducting these audit procedures, you should try and think in line with the financial assertions, which include what? What are some of the financial assertions? One is accuracy, also completeness, also classifications or cutoffs, also occurrence, valuation, existence, and rights and obligations. So when you're conducting these audit procedures, also you will check on the accuracy of the payments made. So also confirm the accuracy of the payments made, confirm the accuracy of the payments of the payments made, to the employees, of the payments made to the employees also. Of the payments made to the employees. And then also on the same note, you will check on the payroll, because a payroll necessarily contains the names of these employees. It should contain all the employees of that company also. So the payroll should be reviewed to ascertain that all the employees were included. The payroll should be reviewed to ascertain that all the employees, or that these employees were included, these employees names were included. That is, this is on the basis of what? This is checking which assertion. This is which assertion is on the basis of completeness. And completeness, we said that this is checking that to ensure that every item that should be included has actually been included in that payroll. That is, I told you those assertions will help you a lot. And this just goes to show that. And then also you can request the bank to to request, also you can request the bank to give information or confirmation, request the bank. So this is confirmation from the bank that payments were actually made to the accounts. Request the bank to provide information for the amounts transferred. Also request the bank to provide information about the amounts transferred from the bank account, also from the bank account. So this is just to verify that the salaries were actually also paid. And then another procedure would be, you can discuss with the persons responsible for authorizing payments for what? The salaries. We said payroll has to be authorized also. Also, you can interrogate the persons responsible for authorizing salary payments. Also, you can interrogate the persons responsible for authorizing the salary payments, of these accounts, So those are some of the procedures that you will have also, among others. So you can think also in line with those payroll controls that we had highlighted also. They will help you from not necessarily, but one of the things that you will start with is you will have to have a list of all the employees if you're to confirm any payments to be paid. In this case, it's just on the basis of what do I need first. First of all, if I am to know how many people are to be paid, I should have a list of everyone who is to be paid. Secondly, I will confirm the amounts that are paid to them by also involving the bank and also checking on the payroll that was prepared to know that all the names of these people were actually included in the payroll that was the running of that payroll for those periods of months, and the amount from the bank, and also the persons responsible for authorizing the salary payments. So you can look at 5C, question 5C. So I want you to try that question 5C. Quickly write those points also there so that we continue. Question 5C. So that is on the procedures under that case, and then also the code of ethics. So this is a repetition of this, what you were talking about here. It was asked again in this concept of the codes of ethics for the forensic accountants. So we have instances whereby the forensic investigation may be done, and the types of investigations that necessarily may happen would be, so on the basis of the types of investigation, that may be done include, so one would be on the basis of if there is a corruption in the entity, corruption. Also on what we call the asset misappropriation. This is a form of fraudulent asset misappropriation. So this is a form of fraudulent activity that undergoes whereby you try to misuse the assets of the company. So under this corruption bit, it can either occur due to one, conflict of interest, or the concept of bribery, conflict of interest also, and also what you're saying as a bribery or any form of extortion, bribery and as such. So these are some of the types of investigations that may be done. And then also on the financial statements, fraud, what we call the fraudulent financial reporting. So go back and check on this. These are on the types of errors that we had discussed also, on the types of errors. One of them was what we call the fraudulent financial reporting, in which we said that this is where the management tries to portray that the company is doing much better than it actually is doing. So that is also one of the reasons why we may conduct an investigation. Now, once we have conducted an investigation, or you as a forensic accountant has done an investigation, you are required to state these findings of the investigation. And where you do that is what we call the investigation report, the forensic investigation report. So what is contained in such an forensic investigation report? So the contents of such an investigation report will necessarily be any form of a report that we have. So that question was actually asked also under November 2020, also November 2020. So this is on the basis of the investigation report. So this is whereby you have conducted the investigation and now you have the findings to the investigation. So this is November 2020, question 1A, I think it was question 1A also. So first of all, you have to think in line with what should be stated in such an investigation report. So that is November 2020. Question 1A, Roman 2. So you're told reports documenting a forensic investigation differ considerably from audit opinions. The investigative report is not constrained by the required language of a governing standard. Forensic investigative reports differ from one another in an organization and the content depending on the client's stated needs. So describe main components of a forensic investigation report. So obviously you would expect an investigation report to have what? Title. It will have a title necessarily that shows that this is the investigation report that has been formulated. So in this case, you're saying, so the report should have an appropriate title. An appropriate title that dictates that an appropriate title that shows that the investigator, complied with the ethical requirements, For example, the ethical requirement of independence. And then also, it should have the person to whom it's addressed to, the client, which you call the addressee. Also. The person to whom the investigation report is addressed to also. So in this case, you're saying the report should contain the name of the client to whom it's addressed to, it's addressed to. And then thirdly, the same concept of this forensic auditing. Also, you will include what you have performed or the procedures that you have done. Also, the statement of procedures performed. So this is to show how you arrived at the audit evidence that you have gathered there. So it should include the procedures performed. So it should include the procedures performed, as agreed by the client or as agreed with by the client. Also. And then also what the client stated, the procedures also that you had to include on the same. And then another thing that you would state will be the purpose of the investigation or the reasons. Also, you would highlight the reasons for the investigation. The reasons for the investigation. What you're saying, the reasons for investigation. So this now comes back to the concept of why you were carrying out the investigation in the first place. For example, to identify the perpetrators of any form of fraud, also the nature and extent of the fraud that has been done. So you would have to include this as part of the report also that you have highlighted. So this one, it should have what you're calling, it should have identification, or identification of the purpose as to why it is being conducted. Identification of the purpose of the investigation. And not forgetting what we found out. So that is the next content, the findings of the investigation also, the details of the findings. Remember, it was an investigation that may end up in a legal proceeding. So this investigation report is very crucial, and the findings will act as the basis of the evidence to be used in a court. So it should have a description. It should have a description of all the findings that you have been able to identify of the findings of all the findings of the investigation done, of all the findings of the investigation. This includes stating the different errors and frauds that you have identified. That is what you're saying. And then any form of a report, what is another content that you would expect? It should be dated. It should include a date. Also the date of the report. It should include the date where the report was drafted. Now this also are similar to what we are going to discuss next under the auditor's report, whereby they bear some of the same kind of contents. So the date of the report, where the report was made, and then also we said that for any work that you do as an individual, you can acknowledge performance of such work through what? Signing the work. So also the forensic investigator's signature will be included. Investigator's signature will be stated in the report. Signature also, and probably even the address also on the same account, and the address, because the users of such a report will require the correspondence or the communication with this forensic investigator to further clarify the findings that he has. So that address will be essential also in that case. So this is what you're saying on forensic auditing, and we have highlighted that one of the concepts of forensic auditing is that it is carried out by the forensic accountant. So this forensic accountant, he has to be registered by a member of by a professional body, also have gained the membership through training and education on the same. So this is an entire bit of another profession in itself when you become a forensic accountant also, the forensic accountant. So we can look at also an instance whereby a candidate was required to also state the procedures to be undertaken, just like what we had for payroll now. On these types of investigation, there was a question that was asked on the basis of bribery, instances of bribery. What are some of the procedures that you can actually undertake? So this question in itself was September 2015. You can look at September 2015 also. September 2015. September 2015. Question 1B, Roman 3, question 1B, Roman 3. Question 1B, Roman 3. So this is that case study over there. So you can read that also at your own time, and then try on the basis of impairment of goodwill, which you had looked at also, the procedures to be performed. Now, Roman 3, you're being asked, recommend 2 procedures to be used in performing a forensic investigation on alleged bribery payments. So this comes back to what you were saying. One of the things is that you would want to get information from the management. So one of the procedures that you would use is you will have discussions with or interrogate the suspected individuals. So also, so the first one you can say, you can evaluate also the systems of controlled overpayments. And what are some of these controls of overpayment? One is that any form of payment, for example, a cash payment, should be authorized and approved. Also, any form of a payment through check, it should have at least how many signatories? At least 2 signatories. Those are some of the controls that you will want to understand or evaluate also. And then also you will interrogate also the suspected individuals, fraudsters or the suspected fraudsters. So this is to get information over the same also. And then also you will have or examine the support documents. Examine the support documents. The support documents of the payments done. And what are these support documents? For example, if they were paid through a bank account, you will review the bank statements to see if actually these payments went out of the bank accounts of the company. So those are some of the what you're saying. Then also you will examine this chance of overriding the systems. What is the likelihood of the chance of overriding the system? So we have talked about this concept of conducting an investigation. So what goes into planning or conducting such an investigation? So I want us to look at the steps undertaken in conducting this investigation. And this question was actually asked in May 2019, question 1C. You can look at May 2019, question 1C. May 2019, question 1C, so that we understand how this forensic investigation may actually be conducted in its entirety. So, May 2019. Question 1C, May 2019, question 1C. So you're told, discuss the procedures involved in applying forensic auditing in fraud investigations. So when you're conducting an investigation, the first thing that you do is, first of all, you understand if you can be able to actually take up such an investigation based on your skills. So one is on the basis of accepting the investigation in itself. So in this case, you're saying, remember this is an investigation that may require additional or more skills. So one will be on accepting the investigation, and for this bit now, when you're accepting the investigation, you have to ask yourself, do we have the requisite skills needed for this investigation that you're saying? So the forensic accountant must consider, in this case, forensic accountant must consider whether the firm has the necessary skills or has the necessary skills to undertake such an investigation, has the necessary skills and capacity, or has the necessary skills and experience to undertake this kind of work and experience. Remember, it may involve complex accounting procedures or auditing procedures. That is what you're saying, experience to accept the work, So which brings back the concept of, it's just the same as we were saying, before you accept any engagement, there are certain factors you consider before taking up an engagement. One would be, do you have enough staff for such an undertaking? The same case applies in this case, that you have to consider the resources available for the firm. And then also, you have to plan the investigation, planning the investigation. How now the investigation is to be conducted. So at this point, when you're planning the investigation, you are identifying the different kinds of extent to which the plan will be done. So in this case, you can say the accountant or the forensic accountant is to consider how this plan is how this work is to be done, is to consider what they have been asked, or what is required of them, what they have been asked, or what forensic accountant, what he or she has been asked to achieve, what he or she has been asked to achieve. And this may be based on, which may entail one, identifying the objectives of the investigation, of the engagement. One would be identifying the objectives. So this is planning, identifying the objectives of the engagement. Is it to identify a fraud? Is it to carry out the investigation into the insurance claims? What is the objective also of the engagement? And then also the best way to gather evidence. All of these are aspects of planning. Best way to gather evidence. So this one will dictate the kind of approach he takes to this aspect. Also, best way to gather evidence. Also, any form of limitation, or any limitation that may be encountered, in the engagement. For example, limitation of scope encountered in the engagement. Now, for example, if they are denied access to all the premises or all the books of accounts, that is what we call limitation of scope, whereby the auditor or the forensic accountant is unable to gather enough evidence or sufficient evidence to fully state that these financial statements are free from material misstatements. That is what you're saying. So one is accepting the investigation. Secondly, you plan on the investigation, and then you gather the evidence now. So third one would be gathering of the evidence, gathering evidence. So this gathering of evidence is whereby now you go ahead and collect evidence using different techniques. So in this case, when you're gathering the evidence, so the investigator has to, so in this case you're saying investigator has to gather evidence over the specific fraud, that has been done, over the specific fraud which now will be used in a court proceeding. And what are some of the ways that he can use in gathering this audit evidence? So So in this case, you're saying the investigator has to gather the evidence over the specific fraud, i.e., in essence, what you're saying is that, so in essence, understanding understanding the fraud that has been committed, understanding the type of fraud, the type of fraud, the type of fraud committed. So this, how then do we gather evidence? So we may gather evidence by using analytical review procedures. So this may gathering of evidence. So the techniques that may be used, techniques for gathering evidence may include gathering evidence, may include so one of them is, so you may use analytical review procedures, and analytical review procedures, we said those are the basic computations of the trend analysis. So one would be use of analytical review procedures, use of analytical review procedures. So this is analytical review procedures. This is the basic computation of the trend analysis and the cross-sectional analysis over time, so that you know instances where there was fraud, and reasonable checks just to compare the financial information and the non-financial information. For example, the case that we had over the employees. So to know the kind of frauds that had been perpetrated, you will compare the payments or the payroll to the number of employees. Such kind of procedure is what you're calling the analytical review procedures also, whereby you compare those or carry out reasonable checks. Another thing that you will do is what we call the substantive techniques. Now, substantive techniques on the other hand, so this is, for example, when you're wanting to know if there is a fraud committed on the bank payments. So for example, you would carry out the reconciliations. Also, if over cash payments, you will carry out the physical type of cash counts or cash counts, just to verify that there was no fraud committed on these payments that you're saying also. So that is under gathering of audit evidence. So this one is the one that takes more time when you're gathering this audit evidence. And then after this point now, what you do is you report on the findings, what we said, the reporting. So at this point now, what you do is you report. So this is on the basis of reporting. So the audit procedures to gather evidence are basically what we had highlighted, whereby you get an understanding of the ICS, also the trend analysis, and any changes in procedures. So on the basis of reporting, so this is whereby, so the investigator or the client is to receive this investigation report, whereby we're saying, so the investigator is to provide a report, of the findings of the investigation, of the findings of this investigation, of the findings of the investigations. And the findings will necessarily state, one, the type of error or the type of fraud that has been committed, the extent, and the perpetrators of such a fraud, So that is on this case, so which will state what you have said, which will state the fraudsters, one, the fraud, secondly, the fraudsters or the perpetrators of the fraud, and also the causes that may have given rise to the fraud. Remember, we said that the forensic accountant at the end of it all may act as what? An expert witness in the case of a legal proceeding. So the last part of this kind of investigation is whereby these findings may be needed in a court proceedings. So the court proceedings, in this case, the court proceedings would be the last kind of step for the forensic investigation. So in this case, you can say the evidence will be presented. So the evidence, in this case, the evidence will be presented in a court, will be presented in a court, So this is in light of trying to punish the perpetrators of the fraud. Be presented to a court, and the accountant on the investigator and the accountant and the investigator may be called upon to describe or to state, to explain the audit evidence, the evidence gathered. Evidence gathered. Remember, this is why we're calling that person the expert witness, because they have knowledge in what they have gathered, so they would necessarily relay much better information as compared to someone who is not knowledgeable in such a field. That is what you're saying also on that note. So this concept of forensic accounting or forensic auditing is very examinable on the same note. So when you're discussing this concept of forensic accounting or forensic auditing, keep in mind those concepts that we have said. One, on the basis of what is the difference between. So a quick recap would be, if I was to tell you, so for example, what is forensic audit, what is forensic investigation, also what is forensic accounting, also on the basis of the investigation report, also the planning or conducting of an investigation is very key, and the concept of the codes of ethics that these forensic accountants may also operate under, and then also the differences between the statutory audit and the financial audit, or the fraud audits and the financial audits, also on the same. So with that being said, that marks the end of the forensic auditing, So that marks the end of the forensic auditing.